Hopefully you are coming to this, technically volume 1 of my Core Coin Collection video series. The first volume was really an introduction to the concept of a box of 20 collection. That's what my collection is. If you haven't seen that introduction, you might want to go back and watch it. It's going to explain a lot. But if you have seen that introduction and you're anxious to get started on this journey with me, I don't blame you, because I've been anxious to be sharing these pieces with you guys for a very long time. If you're new to the channel, my name is Dub C, and I want to thank you for being with me here today. Hopefully you'll go ahead and click on that subscription button and become part of this community. Remember, it doesn't cost anything to subscribe to a channel. It's simply a way to show support. And if you're one of my returning subscribers, I know we've been talking about it for a very long time. I'm so excited to finally be here with you for this introductory video to my coin collection. This is going to be a lot of fun. I am really looking forward to your feedback on this. I begin each of my videos with a simple disclaimer. I am not a financial advisor. I'm not trying to offer you any kind of financial advice. I'm simply trying to share some of my experience having bought and sold precious metals and rare coins for the last 30 or 40 years. That's where I typically end my introduction, my disclaimer. But in all honesty, I have been collecting coins since I was a very young child. So the pieces that you see here in part are the accumulation of information, knowledge, and interest that has come to me over about 50 years of my life. So this is going to be a really fun thing to share with you, and I can't wait to get started on this journey. I also like to begin my videos with a couple of terms that we can work back into it. Now, I'm not going to focus so much on terms. I really want you to be thinking about concepts, but there is one term that's going to be important as we start to unveil these pieces, and that's the concept of a third-party grader. We've talked about third-party grading a lot on this channel. I've actually done videos about it before, but if you're not familiar with it, starting in about the 1980s, there was a lot more interest in buying and selling coins online. This was kind of a new technology. It wasn't quite the internet that we're used to now, but we could see the writing on the wall. And one of the things that was going to help this as the coin market was beginning to explode was the idea of grading coins. Coins are graded on the Sheldon scale of 1 to 70. The problem is that everybody kind of had their own opinion on what a 50 was, or a 60, or a 65. There was no hard and fast rules. You didn't have to follow anything. There was no governing body over these things. So a group of coin dealers and investors started making organizations and businesses that would take your coin for a small fee. They would offer their opinion about the grade and the authenticity of those pieces. And they would also seal them in these rigid plastic holders. Now, these are known as holders, and every third-party grader has their own different holder. We call these slabs in the coin collecting community, and you'll probably hear me refer to them as slabs as this series goes on. So this really started about the mid-1980s. And it's hard for those of us who have been in the trenches for that long to remember that we're talking about something that is now 40 years old, and every single day passes, they get to be a little bit older. This technology, this whole new system of third-party graders encapsulating these coins in a way that they could never be touched again, ensured that the person that was buying them from you, or if you were buying the piece, the person that was selling it to you, was not going to be able to tamper with these pieces, that the grades that you see on them was going to essentially be agreed upon by both the buyer and the seller. In the case of this one, you're seeing this one is mint state 65. So this is a new technology that started when I was a younger man, and I embraced it immediately, or almost immediately. Everybody was a little bit nervous about it at first. And I like to think that third-party grading has really been the most significant thing that's happened to coin collecting in the last 50 years. The most important thing that happened in the 20th century, probably the adoption of the Sheldon grading scale. That's the 1 to 70 scale that we still use to this day. But I maintain that third-party grading has been incredibly important to the entire hobby of coin collecting. And as a collector at heart, something that I feel in my bones, the idea of adding value to pieces through these really interesting early coin collecting slabs, these holders, the organizations that were doing this, is going to be of interest to me, and you'll see it reflected all throughout this collection. Again, if you've been at this for a long time, sometimes it's hard for us to remember that this has been going on for the better part of half of a century now. And because of the way the coin market works, a lot of these really early vintage slabs no longer exist, and I think that they are of particular interest to people who collect coins, something that I have been for as long as I have been almost anything in my life. So third-party grading, organizations that will grade your coin for a small fee, independent of you, offering the opinion about the grade of the coin and the authenticity of the coin, sealing it in these plastic holders that you see here, third-party grading. The other concept that I wanted you to be thinking about is the idea of real estate. This is a term that I throw around all the time, and what I mean by that, especially when it comes to coins, is not about the land that a piece of property is built on, but it's really kind of a similar concept. I am a box of 20 collector. That means I only have, theoretically, 20 coins in my collection at any given time. I know we've talked about that in the introductory video to this video series, that's not necessarily true, and I do allow myself a little bit of room to fudge with those numbers. But the truth of the matter is that my core collection really is pretty close to 20 pieces. That's why we're making this video series. Because of that, every coin in my collection tends to be a representative coin. These pieces are significant historically. They are significant for their scarcity and their grade. They are significant for the attributions that they have, whether it's a special type or a special error or a special form. They are interesting because most of them, in fact, every coin in my core collection, has been graded by a third-party grader. And one of the ways that I try to build on top of the limited real estate that I have in such a small core collection is that every piece becomes almost a skyscraper. When you've got limited space, think about something like Manhattan, you have to go up because you can't go out. And that's the concept of my box of 20. Every piece has different attributes that I've built on top of it, trying to make the most of the limited real estate that I have. So be thinking about that concept of real estate as we get further into this. Without further ado, let's talk about coin number 1 in the Dub C coin collection box of 20, and it's this piece. So you're probably immediately recognizing this, right? This is clearly a buffalo nickel. It's interesting that I rarely talk about copper or nickel pieces in my videos. It's not something that has ever really been significantly of interest to me. However, as we're sitting here filming today, you're looking at the backdrop that I have used since I began my channel. This is a Navajo rug. Indigenous Americans, American Indians, Native Americans, First Nations, however you want to describe the American Native population, has always been of significant interest to me. This is part of where my family comes from. I do not have any Native blood, at least not that I'm aware of. But it's always been a significant part of who my family is. So that's why, if you've seen this backdrop before, this is a Navajo rug. This is a tribe of American Indians, one of the largest ones, and it's significant that I use this because this is uniquely American, something that I'm very proud of for my own heritage and something that you'll see reflected in my coin collection also. The buffalo nickel, the Fraser nickel, the Indian head nickel, however you want to describe it, is another perfect example of this, and we'll talk about that as we get further into it. So I'm going to talk about the designer who made this piece and their significance. Then we're going to talk about the nickel specifically, the buffalo nickel series. And I'll talk about this particular coin, and I want you to be thinking about the concepts that we talked about at the beginning of this video. See if you can see all these different layers, these bricks, these blocks that I'm stacking on top of each other to take advantage of the most that I can with the limited real estate that I have. James Fraser. James Earl Fraser is the designer of this piece. And this piece is absolutely stunning. I really think this is a beautiful coin. You're not going to be able to see it that great on video, so I'll show pictures of it throughout this video. But what makes this significant? James Earl Fraser, was born in Minnesota and grew up in South Dakota, trying to get it into the image the best I can here. He was part of the American West, born in 1876 and died in the 1950s. So this is a person who saw the Plains Indians all the way up to Sputnik. This is somebody that really experienced modern America in a way that not many generations really had the opportunity to. So he was born in the American West, South Dakota, Minnesota. In fact, his father was one of the engineers who went to remove the bodies of the 7th Cavalry Regiment. This was Custer's division after the Battle of Little Bighorn. That's how steeped in this part of American culture he was. But the American Indian, the Native Americans, were always a very important subject to him, something that he covered over and over again. In fact, one of his most famous sculptures is called The End of the Trail. This has been duplicated, replicated zillions of times all over the world, and it really is almost kind of a representation of the effects of Americanization of the native tribes in this country. You have undoubtedly seen this image and might have wondered who designed it. It was actual James Earl Fraser who designed this image. So he was a friend of Augustus St. Gaudens, and it's not a coincidence that I've got the Augustus St. Gaudens, the $20 gold piece here, along with the DeFrancisi piece dollar and the Weinman half and Mercury dime, because these artists were all part of what we call the Beaux-Arts movement. This was started really by Teddy Roosevelt in about 1906 or 1905, somewhere in there, turn of the century. Roosevelt decided that our American coinage had become a little bit stale. And you think about some of the designers that happened before these artists came into the scene, and they were people like Longacre and Barber. And there's nothing wrong with those kind of mid-19th century designers. It's just that their designs were so lifeless. And I think Teddy Roosevelt understood, and these artists were all too willing to jump in, that they wanted to capture something new, something that was almost uniquely American, something that spoke about the life of the subjects, the soul of the subjects, and not just kind of an allegorical symbol of a flat liberty face with a crown that says liberty on it, something more than that. So Fraser was part of this movement, and that's what really makes this interesting. Incidentally, his wife, Laura Garden Fraser, was also a designer in her own right and designed many of the commemorative half dollars of this kind of period of time. In fact, they worked on the Oregon Trail half together. So this is really an interesting family that really had a lot of credentials when it came to coin designing. The history of the nickel itself. So the nickel that preceded this was the V nickel, and that was a design by Barber. And if you're looking at an image of it here, you can see it's attractive, right? This is an attractive coin, but it's missing the soul. It's missing the heart of the subject. Liberty is just an idea. It's a construct. It's not a living, breathing human being. And I think that's what these artists were trying to bring into it. So again, this was a mandate by Teddy Roosevelt. Interestingly, when this design first started to happen, a lot of the commercial industries that used coins in America had a big problem with the difference between the Liberty nickel or the V nickel, the Barber nickel, however you want to refer to it, and this new design that Fraser was working on. They were called into the White House occasionally, and they talked with these industries, and there was one called Hobbs, this business, Hobbs Manufacturing Company, Clarence Hobbs. It's an interesting story if you want to look into it. It's called the Hobbs Affair. Kept on going through round after round after round during the redesign of the nickel, claiming that it wasn't going to work in their anti-counterfeiting machines. Believe it or not, coin operating machines were very big at the turn of the 20th century. And Hobbs kept on trying to make differences and changes to these pieces. It eventually wound up that Hobbs was kind of a charlatan. Nobody was really using his equipment anyway. But the point is that because of his problems with this design, the introduction of the nickel was pushed back to about 6 or 7 months. It's crazy when you think about one business kind of interfering with American coinage, but I think that's one of the aspects that makes these interesting. We know that the V nickel was issued in 1913 kind of clandestinely. There were 5 of them made, right? These pieces are incredibly valuable. But it was really the Buffalo nickel that was supposed to be introduced at this period of time that got delayed, and it's interesting that eventually it did come out. So what do we know specifically about this piece? Well, unfortunately, the director of the mint at the time was Charles Barber, right? The same person that had put out the nickel previously. And he also had issues with this nickel. We'll see those come into play in just a second here. It's interesting that Charles Barber also didn't care much for Augustus St. Gaudens' $20 design. He kept on trying to make it less high relief. And There is some evidence to suggest that maybe he was just a little bit sour graping this entire process, especially when it came to the nickel. He made changes to it, insisted that changes be made so that the dies would wear out less quickly, and it was his changes that actually made the dies wear out a lot more faster than they had been. Interesting, right? Somebody always has to kind of screw with things. Why is this piece special? What makes this really interesting? Well, despite the fact that this piece came out in 1913, the American public was probably pretty much aware of it when it was going to happen. Barber noted some of the things about the design, and again, I'll try to show them on the coin itself, but if I have to refer to images of it, hopefully you can appreciate that because we're dealing with such a small subject here. You can see that the buffalo, the type 1 of this buffalo, the American bison, right? This is a uniquely American thing, right? This is part of the entire theme. One of the reasons why I, as a fan of American history, somebody who's always been interested in Native American and indigenous culture, would be so interested in this design in particular. But that was also Fraser, right? He was trying to pick something that was uniquely American. Nobody else had the bison. This was American design. The original design has the buffalo, or bison technically, standing on this hill. And it's really kind of a very rough image. There's nothing smooth, nothing really flowing about this. You can tell by the Indian's countenance that this is, incidentally, probably one of 4 or 5 different models that Fraser used. A very rough design. It wasn't supposed to be necessarily pleasing and gentle. This was kind of encapsulating the American West. This was a hard place to try to live, regardless of where you came from. But you can see where 5 cents is on the side of this mound, of this hill right here. Even Barber understood that these pieces were going to wear away very quickly. Anybody who is a fan of the Buffalo Nickel series knows that the date here on the Indian shoulder tends to wear away very quickly. One of the failings of the nickel, no doubt. But the word 5 cents also on the side of the coin was going to wear away very, very quickly. So what Barber suggested is, rather than having the bison standing on a hill, as you see here, he had the bison standing on the plain, and it was just kind of a flat surface here, and you're looking at an image of a type 2 nickel. But the important thing is that instead of having 5 cents sticking out from the hill, they carved in the area under where the buffalo was standing. We call that exurg. And they put the word 5 cents in this kind of carved out area, thinking that the rim of the nickel and the kind of carved out deeper area would protect the word 5 cents. Why was Barber so concerned about that? I think it's really interesting that when the V nickel first came out in 1883, it was missing the word cents under the large Roman numeral for 5. That was a great big V. That's why it's called the V nickel. And enterprising individuals took it upon themselves to gild these nickels, to gold plate them, because without the word cents on it, they shared so much in common with the American $5 gold piece. They looked very similar. By gold plating it, you could pass those off as a $5 gold piece to unsuspecting clerks. Did it really happen? We still don't really know. There is some evidence to suggest that it did. Those nickels are called racketeer nickels. But later in 1883, the nickel design was changed to have the word cents put under the V, so that there would be no confusion about this piece being an actual 5 cent piece and not a gold-plated gold piece. So I think Barber was probably thinking about that in the back of his mind, and to his credit, that was probably a warranted change to the design. But what it means practically is that early in the production of the 1913 nickel, they started producing a Type 2 with these changes to it. Now, Barber, of course, made changes to the design too, claiming that it was a little bit too difficult to bring out the fine details. What that means is that he smoothed some of the buffalo's hide, and he smoothed some of the features of the Indian's face on the front of this coin. You're looking at a comparison here between the original Type 1 and Type 2. It's a little bit subtle, it's a little bit hard to see, but again, Barber constantly messing with original designs. I think there was a little bit of jealousy baked into the cake here. So the practical thing is that they stopped making the Type 1 Buffalo nickel pretty early in the production, and the American public was aware of this. They made about 30 million of them, the United States Mint. of this type 1 before they shifted to type 2. So the public was aware of it. They were excited by this new nickel. They were excited by the idea, but they knew that this was already going to have a type 2, which meant that people started hoarding the type 1s. Probably one of the reasons why they continued to make so many of the type 2 in 1913. The implications for coin collectors is that it's not that difficult to find a nice condition type 1 1913 Buffalo nickel because so many of them were hoarded and kept in pretty nice condition. But it's not necessarily the scarcity or the rarity, right, of the pieces in Dub C's coin collection. It is the representative nature of these pieces. Again, my affinity for the American Indian, the indigenous artwork, my favorite designers are all part of this kind of Beaux-Arts movement. I've done entire videos. In fact, I sponsor and run an entire website dedicated to Herman Atkins McNeil, the person that designed the Standing Liberty Quarter of this same period, who was also an enormous proponent of American Indian culture and art. So this is something that is significant to me, and that's why I wanted to have this piece. But again, I want to think about that idea of real estate and trying to build almost a skyscraper on this very, very limited piece of land that exists within my core coin collection. So why this piece specifically, right? That's the core of this. You can tell that this piece has been slabbed. Do you know who the third-party grader of this piece is? If you are familiar with coins, you'll immediately recognize them. The reason why I have these pieces sitting out is because this is an NGC holder. But this is a very interesting and unique, almost NGC holder, and that's why it's significant to me. The first year issue, the first type issue, a significantly nicer looking coin than an average circulated Buffalo nickel, right? This has been graded by a reputable third-party grader. You can see we're already stacking those blocks on top of blocks. What do we know about this coin? What is the grade of this coin? The big reveal is that it's a 65. Now, is that particularly rare? Is that particularly scarce? The answer is not really. Again, so many of these pieces were saved that it's not unusual to find these in higher grade. A 65 is a very nice grade, but it's not the end-all be-all of these pieces. So what makes this one so significant? Why is this part of my collection? Why is this the first piece I wanted to introduce you to? Do you recognize that label? Does that label seem to be missing something to you, right? That's a fantastic question. This is a design by Longacre, and you can see just how kind of staid and lifeless this piece is. A beautiful design, but more importantly, we're looking at the difference between the slabs. This is a modern NGC slab. In fact, this one probably dates about 8 years ago itself. You see that the barcode on this slab is completely absent from this slab, the slab that's got the Buffalo nickel in it. What does that tell us? It tells us that this is a very old slab. In fact, this slab is actually slab version 2.0. If you are a collector of early slabbed pieces like I am, pieces that are significant, this is only the second holder that NGC ever used. Now, the original holder that NGC used is incredibly rare. This is a black holder. This is version 1.0. And it was only made between September and November of 1987. If you come across one of these, now it's important to understand that NGC has released retro versions of their black holders, right? Not every holder that you see is going to be one of these very scarce original early slabs from NGC. But if the label resembles this one without a barcode and with just some basic information without any kind of design on the label, definitely think twice about that piece because that could have some interest. So the Type 1, the black one, was used for a very short period of time, and then NGC decided that it wasn't showing a very good contrast between certain types of coins. I think specifically copper coins. They didn't like the way that it looked. So NGC shifted to a white background. We call that the insert of the slab. And you've got several other examples here, including this modern version that you're seeing right here as well. So this is significant. This is NGC slab version 2.0. It sounds a little bit strange if you're not used to the generations of early holders. That's what we call them, generations. But there are numismatists who do find value in these pieces. And again, these pieces are slowly disappearing parts of American numismatic history. And that's one of the reasons why I like it, those building blocks, right? What do we know about slab version 2.0? It's the second slab that was ever made by NGC, and it was only used for a month, about a month. We think probably about between 25 and 35 days between November and December of 1987, and then they shifted to another newer form of this. So this is an incredibly scarce piece. There are organizations that try to track these early pieces. In fact, you're looking at some information from oldslabholder.com, one of my favorite websites when it comes to looking at these early slabs. And according to their census, that is their best attempt to try to track slab version 2.0 from NGC, there are only just over 300 versions of it known, 300 examples of this slab still known to this day. That is an incredibly small population. We will take a look at that again a little bit later. So this is slab 2.0. It was used literally for a few days back in 1987. We're talking about something that is almost 40 years old now itself, and about 309 examples that we know about. That makes this really interesting, I think. But one of the other attributes about this piece that I really, really like is the fact that it has a CAC sticker on it. Now, you're looking at one of those here. This is a pretty nice example of a peace dollar with this sticker. What does it mean? Really briefly, because this is something that you see come into play with my collection quite often. CAC is kind of a second opinion. So we talked about third-party grading and the significance of that. What if you really wanted a second opinion of your piece that was already sealed within one of these holders? You could send this to an organization called Certified Acceptance Corporation. This was started by a man named John Albanese. John was one of the people behind PCGS when it first started and was one of the principals behind NGC when it began. So this is somebody with a long history of the concept of third-party grading and grading coins. John determined early on in the history of slabbing coins that every single individual grade had what he called an A, a B, and a C quality to them. You could find coins that were A quality. These pieces were really nice within the individual grade. If you had an MS65, for example, you could have a really nice MS65. The ticks or the bag marks were well hidden within design. The coin was really nicely struck. Maybe it had a little bit of nice toning to it. That would be an A quality piece and the kind of piece that you would want to get for your MS65 money. Remember, the internet was coming along. People were starting to buy these pieces sight unseen. And then the vast majority of the coins would maybe be in that middle ground. That would be a B quality coin. The average piece that you would expect to see for an MS65, again, in our theoretical example. But there were also C quality pieces. These were pieces that maybe had bag marks in the wrong place. What if you had a big contact mark right across Liberty's nose on a coin? Technically, that coin could still be a 65, but it was the lowest quality 65, and these pieces tended to be passed around like bad pennies. Anybody wanted to keep the A quality pieces. It's those C quality pieces that seem to get bought and sold the most. So John recognized this, and he launched this organization that for another small fee, you could send your NGC or PCGS graded coins. It's significant. Those are the only third-party graders that John used for CAC. He would look at those coins in these existing slabs, and if he felt the piece was an A quality or a B quality, he would apply the small green sticker to it. We call that a bean sometimes, and you can see it says CAC across it. This is a holographic sticker. It's hard to remove, but they also have very intricate databases that track every single piece that they've looked at based on the certification number, so you can't really fake one of these holographic stickers. I know it's what everybody wants to see, but it's not really the way the system works. The green bean is essentially just an artifact of them taking another look at this piece. It's a graphic representation. What about those C quality pieces? These pieces that were kind of doggy that nobody wanted. Well, John just wouldn't sticker those at all. So the idea is that if you have a coin with a green sticker on it, a green CAC sticker on it, then you know that that is an A or a B quality coin for the grade. And it made it much easier to buy and sell. In fact, the market quickly embraced this idea, and these pieces began to have significant extra value. It was almost kind of thought that if you didn't have a CAC sticker on a really nice coin, that might imply that that coin had been sent to CAC but had been rejected. As I'm filming right now, CAC tends to sticker, that's what we call it, about 40% of the coins that they receive. So that's interesting. That doesn't sound like a very big number, but it's really important that you understand that when CAC is receiving these coins, they are almost always receiving them from advanced collectors or coin dealers who have already pre-screened these pieces, right? They have already taken a look and tried to determine whether or not they think that these pieces are an A or B quality. They wouldn't necessarily submit a C quality piece because it does cost money to have these pieces graded, and it costs money in terms of time and shipping and insurance. So this is not something that you're going to send every single coin off to hoping that it gets a green sticker. This is really something that you're going to pre-screen, and that's significant. If CAC is only stickering about 40% of the coins that they see, and those coins are already kind of pre-screened, you can see just how stringent CAC's stickering process really is. That's significant because this piece does not have a green sticker. It does not have a green CAC sticker. So what's the big reveal with this? If I can get it off without damaging it. This piece has a gold sticker, and that's what makes this significant. Remember those building blocks stacking one on top of another. What does the gold sticker mean? Well, it turns out that some of the earliest pieces that were put into these slabs tended to be undergraded. We've talked about that quite a bit on this channel too, but again, really briefly, the concept is that the early third-party graders tended to be quite conservative with their grades. And as more and more pieces were graded, those grades started to loosen up a little bit. And it's not surprising they would have been conservative when this process first started. But what that means practically is that if you got a coin back from a third-party grader a long time ago, let's say it was one of these early slabs from NGC, and it came back as 65, by modern grading standards, remember we're talking about something that was put into this holder nearly 40 years ago, this coin could actually be an MS66 or maybe even an MS67. Dealers understood that pretty early on, and as the different generations of slabs started to filter into the coin collecting community, the dealers would look for these older slabs. They would spend a lot of time trying to find these pieces in the older slabs because so many of them were undergraded that they would break these coins out of the earlier slabs, having bought them at the grade that was indicated on them, send them back to the third-party graders as brand new raw coins that had never been graded, and hope that those coins would come back with a better grade. This was something that Albanese and CAC recognized pretty early on. So for a very few coins that they receive, they feel like those coins are significantly undergraded. Not are they just really nice for the grade, like that A and B quality, but that they exceed the grade that you see on it. And that's what the gold sticker means. I mentioned that CAC stickers about 40% of the coins they receive with a green sticker. How many coins do they sticker with a gold sticker? About 1.5%. So these are incredibly scarce. There are lots of collectors who have never seen a gold sticker coin before unless you're going to a big coin show. And again, we're stacking these blocks on top of each other, trying to maximize the real estate with a skyscraper and not just an average coin. This coin received a gold sticker. How many examples of the 1913 Buffalo nickel have received a gold sticker from CAC? Not very many, right? We know because they publish, CAC does publish the population reports of the 1913 Type 1 nickel. They have only gold stickered 42. That's it for the entire 1913 Buffalo nickel series. Now, if we're talking about MS65 examples, they have stickered exactly 21. So you're talking about scarcity, on top of rarity, on top of unique. We're building that skyscraper with this example. Only 6, incidentally, have been graded higher than a 65 that have received a gold sticker. So they are out there, but they are incredibly unusual. I think that's really significant. Remember that we showed earlier that Old Slab Holders predicts or expects that there are about 300 of these early Type 2 NGC holders out there. Only about 300, I think the number is 309. Of those, that's the entire coin collecting community that has ever been holdered in those Type 2 holders across every single style type of coin that NGC put into those. How many Type 1 Buffalo nickels exist in the Type 2.0 holder, we just don't know. How many gold stickers are on MS65s? We do know that, but we don't know how many of them are on Type 2 holders. And that's interesting because NGC has continued to hold these coins for almost 50 years now. So it's logical to assume that a lot of those Type 1 Buffalo nickels that are graded MS65 are in much later holders than these older holders. And I think that's also significant. So if there are only about 300 of these in existence, there are probably a handful of Type 1 MS65 Buffalo nickels, 4, 5, maybe 6, who knows, right? The number of those pieces that have received a gold sticker, incredibly small. Is this the only one? It's possible, but probably not. Even so, it's still got to be one of the only examples that we see with this. So it is stacking all of these different areas of interest on top of each other. There is an example of an MS66 NGC fatty slab. That's what these are called sometimes because they are significantly thicker than the modern NGC holders. Sometimes people refer to them as soap bar holders. I like the term fatty. That's what I've always called these pieces. But you're noticing something about these pieces that differentiates it from this piece. And that's this piece has the scale behind it. You can see just how more modern looking it is. You see a border around the label. These are fatty slabs too. These are early NGC holders, but they are nowhere near as scarce as the Type 2.0. So you're looking at a piece that was an MS66 Type 1 Buffalo nickel graded in an NGC fatty slab with a gold CAC sticker. This one actually sold in 2024 through Heritage, and it sold at the time for $1,260. That's significantly more than I'd paid for this piece. That is one grade higher than this piece, though. But do you notice the type of slab that it's in? While it is an early NGC slab, and it is a fatty slab, right? That's one of these early generations. That piece is a Type 5.0, which came much later and was made for years. In fact, the 5.0 was made between 1994, 1993, up until 1995. So there were probably thousands, maybe even tens of thousands of coins that were placed into that 5.0 holder. Does it really matter that much? It really depends on your perspective. For me, as a collector of the most significant and interesting pieces out there, the fact that this piece is one of, if not the only example of an NGC 2.0 Type 1 Buffalo nickel with a gold CAC sticker, it's significant. This is important. That's that real estate that I was talking about. Incidentally, the folks who owned or bought this piece, the version 5.0, are now looking for bids of $1,890 for this piece. Is it apples to apples? I think it's pretty close. I would much rather have a 2.0 slab as a collector of these early slabs than those. And what makes this all kind of wrapped up with a ribbon is the fact that CAC is phasing out stickering coins. This is important. CAC launched its own grading service in 2022-2023 that is competing directly with PCGS and NGC. You recall that those are the only two grading services that CAC would examine in the first place and award stickers to. A few years ago, CAC decided that they would start their own grading service with their own slabs and their own history and everything else. And at that time, John Albanese suggested that they were going to stop stickering other people's holders. And it only makes sense. These are technically their competitors now. They would much rather see these coins go into a CAC holder than remain in an NGC or PCGS holder, even with a CAC sticker on it. This is important because we talked about the idea of gradeflation and that some of these early coins were severely undergraded, as this piece represents. But what that means is that if CAC is going to stop stickering these pieces, then the owners of these pieces are running out of options. They are probably going to start cracking these pieces out, even more than they were cracked out in the early days of this whole cracking out game. Because there's no incentive for them to leave these pieces in these older holders. There were a lot of pieces that were graded accurately back in the day, and there were even some pieces that were undergraded back in the day, right? That's the whole reason that CAC started the A, B, and C quality of coins. And as this hobby has progressed, so many of the really good pieces have been broken out of these older holders that now the population of average or even below average coins in these older holders is starting to become much more significant. There are fewer nice coins, which means necessarily there are a bunch of doggy coins left in these older holders. How do you tell the difference? If it's got a CAC sticker on it, especially if it's got a gold CAC sticker on it. So without this option anymore, you don't know if the coins inside these holders are a C quality coin anymore. There's no second opinion to decide whether or not these remain in their original older holders. And that means that holder population continues to decrease every day. And as CAC stops stickering these pieces, they originally offered a timeline of about 10 years. It's already been several years since they offered that. And CACG, their grading arm, has become so popular, I suspect that they will stop stickering coins much sooner. And that means that these are almost a death sentence for these older holders that have not yet received a green sticker or a gold sticker. Blocks on top of blocks, significance on top of significance. This is not the most valuable coin in the Dubsy coin collection, but I think it really illustrates just how I'm trying to find the most intense amount of skyscraper for my limited real estate. That's what makes this piece so interesting and why it's such a great introduction to the Dubsy coin collection. Let me know what you think about this. Does it make any sense to you? Is it ridiculous to be spending so much time and thought thinking about these pieces? Remember, it's not the pieces that everybody saved that have value in the future. It's the pieces that people forgot about, the pieces that were used. It's those baseball cards that were put between the spokes. It's the comic books that were left in the garage, right? It's the early slabs that nobody was really thinking about when it came to cracking these pieces out. They were just pieces of plastic in the way of profit. And now these pieces have become exceptionally scarce, so much so that some of the major auction houses, like Heritage, have auctions specifically with these old holders. That is the entire theme of them, because there are so many collectors who are seeking these early NGC and PCGS and other holders. Let me know your thoughts about this. If you understand it, I'd love to hear it. If you don't get it at all, leave that thought behind too. I love that idea. Go ahead and put that comment down below. If you have questions about anything that I talked about in this introductory video, by video number 1 really of the coin collection, I would love to hear those thoughts too. If you have a question, leave that question. You know I'm fond of saving. If you have that question, there's a good chance somebody else does. Let's see if we can answer it for everybody. There's no such thing as a bad question when it comes to this channel. I try to air brand new videos every Friday evening, and I'm there during those premieres so I can talk with you about the subject as we're watching these videos for the very first time. But more significantly, I go live after most of those premieres, and we have a period of time where you can ask questions in real time. I love taking those questions. People are making comments. They're talking about other things. Anything related to coins and bullion is fair game. And these live streams are a blast. They're a great way to start the weekend. Another reason why I'd like for you to subscribe to the channel and hit that notification bell so you can see when we're going live next or when we're premiering a new video. If you're here watching this video for the first time with me on a Friday evening, say hi and definitely join me for the live stream after this video. I like to end my videos by saying always be learning. And thank you for allowing me to be a part of your journey, and for being a part of my journey as we go deeper into the world of coins and physical precious metals.